thing my wife said to me this morning was, make sure you don't crack a joke because you're really not funny. So if I do crack a joke, can you kind of pretend that it's funny? It does wonders my self-esteem, it really does. But she is right, I'm not funny. So my name's Marc, I'm director of Myriad. I've been coming to Galway now for a long time, and basically my job is to help companies write funding applications, whether they be Enterprise Ireland, European, or other national funding programs. We don't just work in Ireland, obviously. We've got a growing customer base in Israel, US, China. Yes. There we go. So I'll talk a few things today, just a little bit about us as a team, and a little bit about the funding landscape, what it looks like at the moment. But more importantly, I want to talk about a couple of things that, of course, we've had two quite important worldwide events that's happened, COVID and Brexit. I didn't vote for either. See, that was one of the jokes that my wife said wasn't funny. Thank you. That was. And they have affected things, and unfortunately, those changes are hard baked now, and they're going to be with us forever, I'm afraid. And then I'm going to talk about a little bit that the new funding program in Europe is Horizon Europe, and that was launched last year, but that had some really fundamental effects on how public funding works and how you apply for public funding and your overall arguments and narratives. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of that. So where Horizon Europe really came in, that's those little intricacies. It's kind of been adopted by the other funding programs, whether it be Enterprise Ireland, US, whatever. So there's three core members of the team. Lauren's based out in the US, focuses mainly on cell and gene therapy. Ratman is in the UK, focuses mainly on materials and chemical engineering. And I only do medical devices, just medical devices. And I've had that second line on this slide for quite a long time, and it said trying to get the wife to move to Galway, and it was only when Lauren said, with or without you, Mark? So I've actually had to change that, and I didn't notice. So I've just changed that today. So just building upon what George was mentioning, yeah, Galway, the iHub, really, really successful. Noticed some familiar faces in the crowd. There are some people here that have won all of the public funding, and rightly so, that was due. Rockfield, for instance, and a couple of other people there. But the success isn't stopping. It's not a flash in the pan. The number of companies that are coming through is just increasing, and Galway just works. Just to put it into perspective, I'll talk a little bit about the EIC accelerator that's coming up at the moment, and 12 companies in Ireland are going to be interviewed in a week or so's time. Out of those 12, I'm pretty sure 7 are from Galway. Now, that before would have been heavily in Dublin's favour, but now that really is moving to Galway. And that the reason is the ecosystem just works. Everybody just helps everybody. Just a quick example is all of those companies that are being interviewed in a week or so's time for this EIC accelerator, they're all being mentored through their interviews by the people who were successful last time. I'm not sure that happens in many cities. So I'll move on. So I'll talk a little bit about the funding landscape. So I could be here all day on this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on 3 particular funding mechanisms from Horizon Europe, and I'll talk a little bit about the DTIF as well. But the bit about Horizon Europe that I'm going to talk about is the European Innovation Council, pretty much a flagship competition from Europe, and a lot of the logos that you just saw in the previous slide have benefited from this particular program. So there's 3 different kinds. in this European Innovation Council, and they're pretty much sequential in terms of your stage of development of your technology. So one of the earliest stage is called the Pathfinder. Technology readiness levels quite early. These projects are about facilitating scientific breakthroughs, very early stage. And it's split into two areas, like most European funding tends to be these days. You've got an open side where you can apply for anything as long as it's not military, and you've got the challenge side. For this side, any open, you need an international pan-European consortium of a minimum of 3 parties in at least 3 different member states. Now, I am going to come on to how Brexit has affected that just in a minute. Big budgets here. For the open side, it's 3 million. For the challenge side, it's 4 million. But bear in mind, this is 100% funded and quite considerable amount of pre-financing. I would be comfortable, there's not a blanket rate across the board, but I would be comfortable it would be 50% pre-financed, which is good. It's a single application and it's a single stage. That's unique. So there's no expression of interest and there's no interview. So it's one application and it's a written document, which a lot of the funding programs aren't these days. But it's competitive. You're looking at about a 10% success rate. Early stages though, with the Pathfinder, hasn't been many deadlines so far. So we'll see how that evens out over time, but I expect it to still be very, very competitive. There's a deadline next week, so let's not go for that. But there's a challenge deadline in October. And the challenge is, well, you can see there, I know there's a lot of medtech faces in the room. There's some very interesting healthcare. I won't go through all of these, but you'll see the slides and there'll be a link on them so you can see. So there's some very interesting stuff there for the medtech community. The middle one, if you like, the one following the Pathfinder, is called a transition action. And the rules are so complicated. So to be eligible to do one of these transition actions, the project must build on results of a previously submitted European Research Council project or a Pathfinder that we've just talked about, or 1 or 2 very, very niche previously funded programs. So it must, that's the building block. You must build on results from those projects. But the eligibility rules don't kind of stop there. So you can have a single applicant, or you can have a small consortia of 2 countries, but then the more countries you have, the more partners you require, etc. I won't go through all of the rules with you, but you really need to look at the rules because it's easier to be ineligible than eligible. The grants are up to 2.5 million, but we have seen a number of projects that have been funded way over that. So that's just but you need to justify. If you apply for more, you've got to justify it. One of our clients was funded at 3 million earlier on this year. The good things about these is that Ireland's very, very good at them. There were 2 funded last year, 1 in Galway and 1 in Cork, and one of them was Medtech. This is a 2-stage application. It's a 20-page application. However, the rules say it's a 25-page application, but I can tell you it's definitely a 20-page application. And if any of you are working on that, one of these, the deadline is next week, please make sure that it's 20 pages because it will not tell you until you try to upload your proposal that it's not eligible. And it just automatically will cut your 5 pages out of your proposal. So really important. I found out last night. And there's also an interview step. But the interview step is, it will be peer-based. So there will be experts in their field that will be interviewing you. Because, number one, eligibility is super tough. Number two, you've got to build, it's quite niche, it's got to build on some of the previously funded projects. Success rates are higher. Now it says here about 14%. We've only had one deadline so far for this, so I expect that success rate to increase. If I was to say if there was a path of least resistance in European funding at the moment, I would be looking at this if you could find a way to be eligible. Again, it's open and thematic based, and again, you can see there are some medtech things there. But one thing I meant to mention, budgets are quite small. Because this is quite a niche funding program, there's only 130 million to spend this year, compared with the Pathfinder and the Accelerator. That's quite low, but they don't have many applications because it's quite a niche funding program. Finally, the EIC Accelerator, the scheme that many companies in this building and in Galway have benefited from, and it has by far more applicants than anybody else, by far the lowest success rate of anybody else, but by far the highest budget of anything else. And you can see why, because it's a single applicant, and it can pretty much be any kind of organisation. So it doesn't have to be SME, it can be a mid-cap. So that's what the rules say, but nobody apart from an SME has ever been funded. So bear in mind, SMEs. You can apply for 2.5 million in grant. So unlike the Pathfinder and the Transition Action, this isn't 100% funded. This is 70% funded. So 70% of your total cost needs to be about 2.5 million. Maths under pressure, I'm not going to say what 70%, that's about 3.4, something like that. But you can also, so that should take you, I would say in a medtech environment, that should take you from perhaps a completed preclinical study to the completion of perhaps a first-in-human study. When you're at that point, there's an opportunity for some private investment from the same body. Previously, it was a maximum of 15 million. They've now actually removed that cap, so it can be a higher amount, and that's to take you from your first-in-human study through to commercialization. That private money, though, the European Commission won't act as a lead investor. So you need to come to the party with a lead investor, and any private money from the Commission will be as forms of a match. So they won't lead no more than 50%. Now again, you'll see that a lot of the marketing collateral that you'll see around this is that it's a much simplified application process. So by simplified, what it means is previously it was a single document, but now it's 3 different stages. So that's simplified. So it's step 1, it's an expression of interest. Very, very high success rate. I think it's about 60 to 70% success rate. And then if you get approval at that stage, it's a main application. It's all online, it's all on a portal, but if you download it, it's about 120 pages. And then success following that is an interview. In terms of numbers, I think it was 1,093-ish that was submitted earlier on this year, far higher than the other funding programs. Interesting thing about this is that, again, there's 2 sides. You've got the open side and the thematic side. The Budgets for the two are relatively similar. So you've got 631 for the open, and you've got 537 million for the themes. But the vast amount of projects are submitted into the open side, whereas the budget is exactly the same for the thematic side. So if you can find a way to be eligible into the themes, I suggest that you do that. I think it was circa 80-20, 80% of the, Sean might be able to confirm that at the end, but I think it was about 80% of the 1,093 went into the open, 20% went into the themes. But the themes are difficult to fit, so have a look at them. They'll be in the link. Anyway, that's sent through. So that's Europe in a nutshell. That's only one form, one element of the Horizon Europe funding framework. It's massive, and there's many, many other funding programs, but I didn't really have time to talk about them all today. So I'll just talk about DTIF. Everyone knows about the DTIF. But things have just changed a little bit. So DTIF, it's a fantastic funding program from the agencies, administered by EI, and it's the highest success rate out there. Brilliant for Irish companies. We're currently, the next deadline is for round 5 of the DTIF. So in perspective, round 1 was 300 applicants, and they funded 27. Round 2, 64 applicants, and they funded 16. See, the success rate's good. We're just waiting. So round 3, 20 projects for 95 million. So the project sizes are big as well. Round 4, we submitted earlier on this year. Sorry, I can't remember when. And the results are due imminently. And the interviews are going to be somewhere in the middle of May. I said very competitive, but it is the highest success rates out there for public money. But there are some stringent criteria, which I'll go on to in a minute. But round 5 was announced, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, and where previously DTIF was pretty much an open funding scheme. Round 5 is specifically aimed at advanced and smart manufacturing. But that's not where the changes stop. Previously, SMEs were 50% funded. Well, everybody apart from a university or an RPO would be 50% funded. However, this time round, SMEs are still 50% funded, RPOs are still 100% funded, but large companies, I think the manufacturers, are 40% funded. That's a big change from previously. It's still a 2-stage application, written application and an interview, and the deadline's in July of this year. It feels like quite quick. It feels like a quicker turnaround than it has been before. You must be a client of EI or one of the agencies before time of application. That's really important. And another big thing here is that previously DTIFs were focused on relatively early stage development. So technology readiness levels probably 3 to 6 or 7-ish, something like that. And that was designated industrial research activities, where that means generating new knowledge only. But this time it's broadened the scope to go from TRL 3 to TRL 9, which is great, because that's not just industrial research, like generating the new knowledge, but now that's also exploiting the new knowledge. So previously in a medtech scenario, DTIF might have finished, we might tell me that I'm wrong, that would finish end of a preclinical model, whereas now it will take that a lot further, which I think is brilliant news. So that's DTIF. Couple of things that will have changed, as I just mentioned. The industrial research activities, it's been broadened. So you don't have to, I would always advise pedantically with clients that Are you spending budget on generating new knowledge? No, that's not the case anymore. You still have to align with the national strategic outcomes, and you still have to align with the Irish research agenda. Very, very detailed budgets for DTIS, and also your salary and utilisation caps, they will still remain. So salary caps is circa 85,000 euros per year, but there's also a utilisation cap. So I think it's MD and CEO of the business, they can only apportion a certain amount of their cost towards the project. And review the post-award procedures, because they are quite lengthy. Anybody who has an active DTIF at the moment will know this well. It's quite a long time, and it's quite a complicated procedure. There's quite a few knowing smiles in the audience then. So that's what the funding landscape looks like. So what I really want to I'll go through this now, is about to say that we've really noticed that actually post-pandemic, post-Brexit, there has been some things that have really, really changed. And I thought things would go back to normal, but the trends I've seen is they're not going to. So I call this is a new world post-COVID, and I've split this into two areas. First of all, how COVID-19 and the pandemic has affected existing projects. If you've got an existing project and you're thinking, oh, the pandemic has really affected how we work, to some extent, don't worry, project amendments, project extensions are commonplace. However, please try to do only one. If you try to do more than one, that's going to be difficult. So if you need to amend your project or delay it, think of exactly how long you need to do that for. Most touch points with the funders are online, and they're actually also, the trend is to replace big written technical reports and financial reports in your projects to be more of a presentation. So that's good news, but you're not going to meet your project officer. You're not going to go to Brussels. It's good news. So everything is online. Heavily reduced number of project officers, and they're recruiting lots more project officers, but they're very new, and the project officers are working from home. So a lot of the project officers new, and they are seriously overworked. They've got vastly more projects than they've ever had before, so bear with them. Things are going to take a little bit longer. A couple of things. Speak to your project officers about bolt-on funding. We have the COVID Recovery Fund. There are, in quite a few mechanisms, there are bolt-on funding opportunities that can help you overcome some of the problems that the pandemic could have caused you. Patient recruitment, execution of clinicals, etc. That's not in the public domain, but worth speaking to your project officers about. And also, there is quite a big push at the moment in having a look at your projects, and can the scope of your project be expanded and contribute in one way, shape or form to the post-pandemic effort. If it can, speak to your project officer. There is funding available to do that. Again, that's not in the public domain. Quite a few companies have been approached directly from their project offices about this, where broadening the scope would be obvious. But if you've got an idea to do it, speak to your project officer. But also, public budgets have increased. They've increased significantly. So that's if you've got a new project, but if you're planning, so if you've got an existing project, but if you're planning on applying for a new project, some things to bear in mind. Everything is online interviews, no longer face-to-face interviews, and plan your projects for remote working. even the technology or infrastructure that you need to put in place to enable your project to be remote working, that is an eligible cost. Also, that's not in the rules, but I can tell you that it is an eligible cost. Plan for delays, especially in patient recruitment and execution of your clinical trials. If you don't, your evaluators will question you about it. I've seen quite a lot of comments about that. The evaluators are going to expect you to know the exact rules in individual countries, especially when you're talking about clinical trials. So know the specific rules in the countries and the levels of restrictions and what they're likely to be going forward. From a personal point of view, the biggest problem my clients have is recruitment of staff. Plan for it early. I mean, really early. Galway's only so big. We've got so many companies coming out of Galway, but there is a real shortage of really great people. So plan for this delay early. Now, the funders are quite pragmatic, but if you turn around to your funders and they say, oh, you've got a start date of the 1st of June, and you say, oh, great, I can't start till October because I can't find enough people, it'll get to the stage that it won't wash with the funders. You could have that plan from the beginning, and that's got a lot worse during the pandemic. Everything is also delayed. Now, what I've just said about the funders, it won't wash if you can't start your project for 2 months, whereas some things with the projects, I'd expect it to take 4 weeks. That's been 12 months. People that submitted their EIC accelerators in June last year, they got their money about 4 weeks ago. But that is now increasing. It was because, as I've mentioned before, a lot less project officers, many of them are new, many of them new processes, but they think that that learning is now pretty much complete. And make your project, biggest piece of advice to give to all our clients, and I think I probably said it to a few people in this room, make your project officer your best friend, because you're going to need them, because your project is going to have some bumps in the way. Quickly, Brexit. Contrary to popular belief, everybody in the UK did not vote for Brexit, but it has changed things. I'll give you a really good example. So if you are applying for a collaborative project where you need a particular entity from different member countries, the rules will say that the UK is an eligible partner, which they are. But then you get funded and the European Commission said, oh, brilliant, UK is eligible to participate, but they're not eligible to receive any funds. Be really mindful of that. But good news, we have a brilliant Prime Minister in the UK. That was a joke as well. That has indicated that we have a ring-fenced budget to fund UK companies in this scenario. Ring-fenced, which is now turned out to be competitive and a very, very complicated process. So be mindful. It's important, and a problem that an Irish consortium is actually going through at the moment. Not in Galway, in Cork, but it is a problem that they're going through at the moment. So be really careful. Financial capacity checks now are absolutely commonplace. Even in projects that are 100% funded, they're checking the financial capacity of companies to deliver those projects. That's really never happened before. It's happened on odd occasions with odd funding programs. That's now happening with the vast majority of funding programs. Oh, and yes, if your projects, your actual grant amount that you're getting, if it's 2.5 million, exactly 2.5 million or above, it has to go through an extra level of security authorization at the Commission. If it's 2,499,999 now, it doesn't. Now, that, again, that's not in the rules, but that's one thing that we're running into at the moment. These are quite a few things wrapped up together that I believe has been affected by Brexit. I think I'm running over time, so I'll speed things up a little bit. So I mentioned before, 2 more slides and that's it, I promise. I mentioned before about that some of the things that's happened in Horizon Europe is kind of filtering through with other funding mechanisms. And this is a really good example. So previously, for a budget, you would write a load of tasks, put a budget alongside a load of tasks, and that'd be a budget. It's not quite like that anymore. What it's like that now is you have to describe the features of your technology, and then you have to show the elements of your features that you already know. What stuff have you already developed? And then you have to say, this is the things that we need to develop in terms of that feature. The funders will automatically think that that's what you need the budget for. And then, so it's the delta between what you know, what you need to know, that's what your budget is. And then that's how it adds to your value proposition and your IP position. So don't think of it anymore about a bunch of work packages, a bunch of tasks. It's what do I not know? And that's what your budget is driven by. That sounds really simple, but it's never been like that before. But then as a result of that, this isn't easy. It obviously takes some time. So it's not just a walk in the park. And just quickly, the final thing is knowing who your stakeholders are between you and commercialization, what problems they have, and how you overcome those problems. That is probably the central element of all funding applications. So I've said here, who are your main stakeholders? How are they involved? What are their problems? What benefits, what benefits they expect is what would need to happen for them to make a buying decision, or what would need to happen to make them change. And then some of your features that we've just talked about, they're obviously aligned with what you need to do to alleviate their problems. And that also puts you ahead of the state of the art. It's a slightly different way of thinking about it, but that particular argument is central to virtually all public funding. Just one quick thing is, previously you'd have to have talked about technology readiness levels. It's not really done like that anymore. What's really done now is you describe what milestones or achievements that you've done to date, and then you talk about what achievements you need to make in the future. So it's not, I'm at technology readiness level 5 because I've done X, Y, and Z. It's, I've done this amount of work that de-risks the technology, and that puts us at this point here. So technology readiness levels kind of don't exist anymore. So very, very quick thing, because what I've talked about so far has been competitive. Just very quickly, on to my CEO Barry, just for 2 minutes, just to talk to you about the R&D tax situation in Ireland, because this is your entitlement. And Ireland just doesn't claim enough R&D tax. So I'll just hand over to Barry just to very quickly, just for these slides.
Okay, so I've just realised why Marc has brought me here. Before I arrived, he said, Barry says, I want you to come to this Irish gig with me. And I said, okay, absolutely fine, Marc. Why? He says, I want to do a bit of an ant and a deck. And I said to him, well, in actual fact, I leave it to your imagination. Which one looks like ant, which one looks like deck? I don't know. The other reason, I am the CEO of Myriad. Last night, Mark, after 2 pints, told me actually what it meant. Chauffeur executive officer. Because somebody arrives at Dublin Airport without a driving licence, without a credit card, and we couldn't get a hire car. We had two options, bus, train from Dublin, or Barry puts his hands in his pocket and pays for a car. So I'm going to touch on about R&D tax credits. I involved with UK, Ireland, and also now with France, I'm looking at Germany. This is the icing on the cake, in my opinion. You should be claiming R&D tax credits, even if you get EIC accelerator or you don't. It's an entitlement. It is underutilized. A lot of people see the word revenue, they run to their accountants. I am a bean counter, but what I will say is you don't run to your accountants. The key criteria in any claim is the tech. Get the tech report right. The actual numbers is the simple part. So 25% corporation tax saving on your EU R&D expenditure. It is increasing at some point to 30% for small and micro. I expect at the end of this year, we're waiting for state aid approval on that. And then profit and loss making businesses can claim. You do get cash. You get it in 3 installments, typically over 3 years. To get cash, you must pay something to revenue, either corporation tax, but you can imagine a lot of you are not going to pay corporation tax for some time, or hopefully never, or you pay across payroll liabilities. So you employ people, you put them on the payroll, you can get that cash back. And then you don't have to hold the IP rights, you just got to develop the technology, and at some point try and utilize that technology and get some hopefully income. Quick check, is it R&D? Does your project attempt to advance science or technology? Does it contain technical uncertainties in the eyes of a competent professional? I'm sure you're all competent in what you're doing. You tick that box. Will you have head scratching moments and sleepless nights? Don't we all? So you tick that box. And you therefore qualify for R&D tax credits. It's as simple as that. So what do you get the 25% on? You get on your staff costs, agency staff, consultant costs, contractors, they are restricted based on your own internal costs that you incur. Materials, using R&D, prototyping. You also get some capital equipment as well. You can get that through. And the absolute key in this, which not many people know, it's important. Of course, EIC accelerator is 70% funded. So you don't have to take the full grant off your R&D eligible expenditure for tax credits. You only take off the funding for example, your staff costs, you take the labour funding off, which is great because a lot of you will get overheads on the EIC accelerator. You do not need to take them off. So if you spend 100,000 on staff, you only knock off 70,000 for your staff. You've got 30,000 left, of which you'll get 25% on. I can't stress how important that is. As I said, it's the icing on the cake. I think that's it, Mark. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks very much, Mark, and indeed Barry there at the end. And for the people that are online, we will take questions. I know we ran over a little bit there, but we will take, so you can submit the questions if you have them there. We'll take a few at the very end. So it was great to have someone of Mark's experience and depth in relation to the EU funding. I mean, you can see there, he covered very briefly the EIC, the Pathfinder, the transition and the accelerator, and gave loads of examples. Also the DTIF funding, which we mentioned there earlier, we've been very successful in the iHubs. And indeed then the COVID impacts, I really liked some of the tips that Mark was given. You know, you won't hear these or you won't see them written down, but it's great to be able to hear them. And then a few points on post-Brexit. And in relation to the R&D tax credits, I think if there's enough interest in that from the clients, we may do a separate, longer, maybe more detailed workshop on R&D tax credits. So our next speaker now is Dr. John Thompson, and John is CEO and co-founder of Aurigen Medical. So where he leads the financing and strategy functions, including clinical trial design, reimbursement and stakeholder engagement. Before co-founding Aurigen Medical, John had a successful career in Pfizer, where he was tasked with the commercialization of several in-market and pipeline assets. John graduated from the Royal College of Surgeons and worked for many years as an intensive care physician and has an MBA from the Smurfit School of Business. Really delighted to welcome John to give us, if you like, the client company side of investment funding. Welcome, John.
Thanks very much, George. My slides, do you want me to just share them myself, or do you have them on the deck there?
If you can share them yourself, it might be easier. Thank you.
1 second now. Okay. Can you see those slides now? Great. Okay, so I suppose thank you very much, George, for the very kind introduction. Aurigen Medical was formed about 4 years ago, so we spun out of NUIG and we were part of the BioInnovate program. So I suppose, you know, the company was always started with a very clear vision and mission, and you might ask, why is that relevant to funding for grant and various other, you know, state body funding? And I think that the real point is that, you know, when they're looking at these companies, it became very clear to us after a number of applications, you know, it's really about having a vision and a mission to, I suppose, change the world in some way, whether that be, for our case, it was medtech. But I think, you know, whatever industry you're in, it's like, how are you going to move the dial and clearly articulate that that vision and that mission to these kind of review panels that'll be reviewing your application. And I know that the room there is full of people who are very passionate about their companies and about the projects that they're involved in. But unfortunately, just to get to the point where you can share that passion, you know, you have to write what becomes very, you know, detailed, long, and can be quite onerous documentation. And I think it's always, whenever we started writing these applications, we always try to keep the vision and the mission of the company stay front of mind and try and ensure that we get some of the passion that we have for what we do into our applications. It's really easy in these applications to, you know, I suppose, to just lose a lot of the passion that we have for our businesses and why we spend so many hours and months and years of our lives dedicated to these things, and it can very easily get lost. I think one of the key things for me from the grant funding that we've received is it's allowed us to create an exceptional team. And this is a fantastic opportunity for me to just, you know, I suppose, to thank my team for the enormous amount of work and effort that they put in every day, working out of the iHubs, and we have some remote team members as well. But we're very lucky in Aurigen to have a fantastic team with huge experience and a lot of passion and drive. So what do we do at Aurigen? Just very quickly. So Aurigen was really started to create better solutions for patients with atrial fibrillation. One of the things that we discovered, I suppose, during the BioInnovate program was that there was, you know, almost 3/4 of patients with atrial fibrillation, the current treatment options just simply didn't meet their needs. And we recognize that, you know, the big players in the market, the medtech companies and the pharmaceutical companies, really weren't engaging with this patient population, and that kind of written them off in a way. And to be honest, a lot of physicians had kind of written them off as well. And these patients would get to the stage where essentially the standard treatment options failed, and they would often just be referred back to their GP with no more treatment available. And I suppose myself and Tony, who started the company, felt that, you know, there really has to be a better solution. And that's where Aurigen came from. And I suppose it's a passion for our patients that's really kind of driven us from there on. And it's that passion that we've tried to get across in our applications for various different funding programs. And to that end, we've been very successful, I suppose. So we ranked first in Europe in both the SME and the FTI awards. That's going back to kind of about 3 or 4 years ago now. And with that, we were able to raise 5.5 million of non-dilutive funding, and more importantly, get EU Commission backing. And we were also very fortunate to gain DTIF funding of 5.9 million from the Irish government in the first round of the DTIF. And again, both of those programs have been instrumental in allowing the company to get to our current stage of development. So I suppose some of the reasons why you might go for the grant funding over and above just purely the funding, and some of the things that have been very important for us. So it's really allowed us to work with world-class partners who are capable of working at scale. And I think, we've had the opportunity to work with Tyndall down in Cork, who are, world leaders in photonics. We've had the opportunity to work with the TMD lab here in NUIG, not NUID. And those are leaders in ablation sensing technology. We work with MediBrain over in Israel, and they develop novel scaffolds and membranes. We work with the Czech Technical University on tissue response and electrode optimization. And we work with Teleflex, the large OEM medtech company. They're based down in Limerick, and they're helping us to develop our delivery system and providing systems assembly and various other design verification and commercialization work. As Marc's already said, these applications are very competitive, but I think Ireland punches well above its weight, and even more so, I think, there are some types of businesses where it can be difficult to make people feel emotionally bound to them and to get an emotional response from reviewers. But I think for those of us who work in the healthcare space, and whether it be pharma or medtech or biotech, I think we have a huge advantage here because it's very obvious what the benefit of funding our technologies are and who the end beneficiaries are going to be. So I think, while it can seem a little bit daunting when you look at the pure stats, I think being from Ireland certainly seems to help. And I think being in the medtech space it seems to be a huge advantage in being successful in these applications. Some of the other things, I suppose, that we've learned around partner engagement. Now, as Marc said, you don't need to have a partner for some of the programs, but to be honest, I think it's never really a bad thing, especially when you're a small startup company. If you can, attach yourself to bigger, more established companies where it's clear that there's a mutual benefit for both, and both companies can grow, and you can feed off their scale and they can feed off your innovation and nimbleness and ability to be able to innovate, then it's a huge win-win. And the Commission, in our experience, and certainly the DTIF, have both really appreciated that kind of approach. Your partners don't have to all be technical. I mean, I think there's a lot of us in the room here are very technical with science or medical or engineering backgrounds, but they don't have to be. I mean, a lot of us will have gaps, whether it be with regulatory, whether it'll be around the preclinical or clinical. Some of us may have very specific engineering gaps, or we may have gaps in business strategy. And those are all, acceptable kind of partners for some of these grant applications. I'd say some of the advice that we've had when we've engaged with partners is engage as early as possible, and do that under NDA so both sides can be safe. I know there's a preoccupation among a lot of innovators, about protecting their IP, and it's important, of course, but I mean, you can't be so silent that you get nobody interested and nobody excited. So engage early and engage under NDA. Identify the required contribution and be able to translate that into really specific work packages. That's really important so that the partner you're working with knows exactly what they have to do from the very start, and there's a very clear milestone and payment associated with that. Spending time on those cost requirements, try and get them as granular as possible, because there's nothing worse than, underestimating it and then, not having the wherewithal to be able to complete the work package. The partner needs to understand what their obligations and requirements are. As Marc said, some of these programs, there's quite a lot of bureaucracy in the reporting post-funding, and some of the partners can get a little bit get a bit thrown by that. So it's important to just, I suppose, explain to them and hold their hand a bit, and people like Marc and those grant writers can support you in that activity. You need to get a PIC number from the EU Commission. That's important. Don't leave that till the last minute. It can definitely delay things. Obviously, company needs to be registered and have legal sign off on that. You need obviously a lead partner. It can initially look complex, but there's lots of benefits. And select a partner that's capable of growing with your company. I think that's really important too. So what were the key benefits to Aurigen from grant funding? So I think it's about, for us, it was about reducing the time frame from concept to commercialization. I think too, one of the big issues that we've had is we're a cardiac implant technology. And so the risk profile of our company and our technology is very high. It's way above the risk profile of pretty much every VC out there in Europe, and to be honest, almost all of them in the US as well. So, you know, for a company like ours, getting the backing of the EU Commission, getting that support was absolutely critical. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind we wouldn't have been able to get here with the non-state body funding that's available. There's just no appetite for the level of risk that a device like ours carries. Importantly, the funding is non-dilutive, which is great, because again, for companies like us, if we're successful, we're going to have to do a number of rounds of funding, and all of that dilution will obviously mean that the founders and the management team and our employees will have, you know, a smaller share of the overall company at the end. So having this initial funding to be non-dilutive is very important for us. During the process, if you're successful, they'll assign mentors to you to support your project as it goes on, as it goes forward, which is obviously very useful. We've had 3 really good mentors who've supported us in commercial and reimbursement. I think one of the key things that can't be underestimated is the international validation of the company, the need that you're looking at, your technology, and the market opportunity. And that'll obviously be very important when you start speaking with, you know, external investors. It's increased our visibility with obviously venture capitalists and financiers, with physicians who are a key partner of ours. It's allowed us to form kind of partnerships now with NIHR in the UK, which is a research body. It's allowed us to engage with strategic partners like multinationals and like some of the big OEM providers. And that's all been really important. And I think one of the other things too is it's obviously allowed us to dramatically expand our team, which is fantastic, but it's also increased our visibility to other potential employees. And as Marc said, you know, one of the big problems that a lot of startups have now in Galway and probably everywhere is attracting new employees. There's an awful lot of jobs out there and there's not enough skilled employees. So I think anything that can increase your visibility is obviously going to be hugely beneficial as you try to fill those posts. So some of the do's and don'ts for the application process that we learned. I suppose the first thing, and I'm not sure whether I've written this down. Yes, I have it a little bit later, so I'll talk about that. But get to know your national contact point. For us, it was Sean Burke. I know he's in the room there. Hi, Sean. Sean has been absolutely invaluable to Aurigen Medical. I would say that without his support and help, there is no way we would have gotten the funding and certainly not have gotten the recognition that we've got within the commission. And Sean is a fantastic contact point. I don't exactly know what Sean's role is now, whether he's still involved with Accelerator, but certainly get to know who your national contact point is, engage with them as early as possible, discuss your proposal. They helped us with reviewing some of our proposals, and the feedback was invaluable. Become an EI HPSU client. I know for most of you in the room, you already are, but I think it's an important consideration, and certainly it's essential now if you want to apply for the DTIF. Engage a grant writer. We use Marc. He was fantastic. We've been working with Marc now for 5 years, and it's been a fantastic relationship. I would say my feedback on grant writers are, you know, Marc is brilliant, but ultimately, you know, you need to give yourself the time and space to write this application yourself. Marc, I've always looked at Marc as like a fantastic editor if you were writing a book, but ultimately, you know, it's the author that needs to write the book, and the editor is going to make it as clear and as coherent and ensure that it meets the publisher's requirements. And so I definitely wouldn't defer the writing of the application to the grant writer. That would be my feedback. I know some companies do that and they've been successful, but for me, I always like to write the first version of it myself, and then get the grant writer on board and get their feedback, and then, you know, ensure that we can make it the best possible application. Critically, you must be able to demonstrate the disruptive and novelty nature of your innovation. Me Too innovations are fantastic, and there are a lot of private investors who like those kind of technologies, but unfortunately for most of these kind of state funding, it's for high risk projects that traditionally outside investors would be slow to invest in. So it's critically important that you show how disruptive and novel your technology is. And then you should be able to demonstrate that this is high risk, and that getting funding through the usual vehicles like angels and VCs would be difficult, if not impossible. Clearly define the business opportunity from a European dimension. So company growth, sustainability, jobs, new market, and in the current landscape, it's how Europe can be more self-sufficient. That's obviously very current with what's happening in Ukraine, but it's also become very current with the supply chain issues that arose during the COVID pandemic. And there's certainly a much greater focus now from a European perspective in how Europe can be more self-sufficient and be able to deliver technologies from start to finish ourselves. Draw the reviewers in with a really strong executive summary. Demonstrate clearly you've got a clear need and a clear solution that's linked with societal challenges, costs, or potential reductions. And I would say this review is really critical, because if you can get that review, that executive summary right, it means that this is what goes out to potential reviewers, and based on that, they will select or deselect what applications they want to review in full. So you really want to ensure that you get somebody who knows a lot about this space, and they're much more likely to understand the value of your solution. So I would say do not underestimate the importance of this section. Describe your company and the strength of your team. Have a really clear narrative. Again, as Marc said, it's around milestones that have allowed you to get to a certain TRL. And again, make it really, really clear, really concrete milestones. And then I think for me, the most important thing of all, and certainly I've been asked by a few people, would I have a look at their submissions? And I have done that. It's a lot of work, but I've helped. And I would say one of the things that comes across is there are lots of people in the room there who are experts in what they do. One of the issues, I suppose, about being an expert is that it can be very easy to get lost in detail, and it can be very easy to get lost in acronyms. It's important to recognize that a lot of the reviewers of these applications will be very, very smart, but they may not be an expert in your area. And so it's really about making the narrative as clear as possible. So imagine you were presenting your application to somebody who is, you know, a leader of an entirely different type of business. So what I mean is, this is a highly experienced person. They're very smart, but they don't know anything at all about your industry. And position your application from that standpoint. And I think that's always going to put you in a better position for success. And the important thing is get it across with passion. You know, like, explain why this is important, why this is important to Europe, why this is important to stakeholders, and why it's important to you. You know, passion is what separates, you know, a good from a great application. Clearly communicate that you have the best team possible to execute your proposal, and get as much validation as you can and include it in there. Validation from multinationals, from your physicians, from stakeholders, from financiers. A few don't complicate the language. I said that, you know, make this as clear as possible. I used to say use illustrations. You can still use illustrations, but now they need to go into your deck. Some of the applications still allow you to include them, but they're moving more and more online, which will remove that, which makes it even more critical that your application is as straightforward as possible. Don't give yourself too little time to do these applications. They take time. I would say a minimum of 2 months to get your application ready, and make the reviewer's job. Don't make the reviewer's job difficult. Reread your application. Get other people who are not in your company to read it. Make sure it's clear. It's aimed at a smart non-expert, because the reviewers don't have very long to review these. And if they're trying to second guess what you're saying, well, you're going to find it very difficult to be successful in these applications. That's everything from me. Thank you very much, guys.